What's up everyone and welcome to this video. Today what I'm going to do is show you how you can build an application that analyzes a user's songs using the Spotify API. We're going to use a really cool library called Spotify that's going to allow us to get a user's top 10 songs. Once we get the top 10 songs, we're then going to query the Spotify API for features about those songs like danceability, energy, valence, and of course much more. We'll pick and process a few of those and use a really cool library called Streamlit to display all of that on a bar chart, which you can see right here. You're going to learn a lot on this video, and of course it takes me quite a long time to make these, so please do tap the like button below, and by the end, if you've enjoyed it, you can of course subscribe because I'm going to be making a lot more videos on cool and interesting Python projects like this. With that said, buckle up your seatbelts and let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is kind of give you an idea of the libraries that we're going to be using for this project. The first library is the Spotify library, and think of this as being a really easy to use library that allows you to interact with the Spotify API. If you've watched my previous videos, you know that I do favor this library. It just makes it really easy to work with the Spotify API. But of course, I have more in-depth videos showing you how you can do it from scratch without the need to use any kind of library. In this case, Spotify is a very simple library, and as you can see, if you come to the documentation, they give out of the box an example of how you can get started quickly. All you need to do is import the library, then you need to provide some credentials, and then you can go ahead and call the methods available or given to you by the library. Now if I scroll further down below, it shows you how to install, and it goes on to authorization flows. Authorization can be a tricky topic and OAuth can catch many people out, but very simply in the context of the Spotify API, I'm going to explain it to you, which is if you're trying to build an application that is just going to search for songs on Spotify, you can probably use one of the easier authentication methods, and that is client credentials. And as you can see, if you scroll further down below, they give you a very basic example of how you can implement client credentials. All you need to do is provide a Spotify client ID and a client secret, and then of course you're good to go. Now that can work for many scenarios, but the scenario that we're trying to build is allowing the user to log in with their Spotify. The moment you want to build an application that gets a real user to log in with their Spotify, it's likely that you won't be able to use client credentials. Instead, you're going to have to use what's known as the authorization code flow. Now I've covered authorization code flow and what it means in another video, and I've kind of explained end-to-end exactly how OAuth works. So if you want a deeper understanding of what's going on behind the scenes, of course you should check out that video. But here the basic idea is that this authentication flow is going to allow you to build an application which will allow a user to log in with their Spotify. And as you can imagine, the great thing about Spotify is they just make that really easy for you with a couple of lines of code. And that's kind of why I like the library, because again, it just takes away a lot of the headache, and it is not the easiest thing to do if you're trying to build this from scratch. Now if you scroll down further below, they give you a bit more information about customized token caching, and I think one of you guys asked me in a comment in another video how you can implement your own cache handler, and I kind of directed you to this section here. Of course, if you do have any questions about the Spotify library or the Spotify API, just drop them in the comments below. Now let's get to the more interesting part, and this is essentially the API reference. Now think of this API reference as just being a wrapper on top of what Spotify API already offer you. So as you can see, there's so many different methods that might be familiar if you've already looked through the Spotify API. Methods like retrieving albums from the Spotify API, retrieving artists, retrieving audio features, which is something that we're going to be implementing in this video, and as you can see, the list just goes on. You can even retrieve information about what the user is currently playing right now. So as you can see, it's down to your imagination, and of course you can build some really interesting applications with the wealth of data that Spotify will provide to you. Now I've switched over to the official Spotify API because I kind of want to go over exactly what we're going to be building in this project. Our application is going to allow a user to log in with their Spotify, and what we want to do is analyze those songs and give them a visualization of the features of those songs. Now this is a very simple but powerful example of what you can do with the library, and it's pretty cool to be able to tell a user exactly what kind of songs that they're listening to. And the really cool thing about Spotify is that they give you this data in that you can retrieve the songs that a user listens to, but they'll also give you features of that song. So as you can see, I'm on the documentation here, and if I click on tracks, and then if I click on get tracks audio features, as you can see, they give you features about given songs. So let's just go through some of these to give you an idea of what they contain. For each song, they'll give you one of these features. So in this case, as you can see, acousticness, which is a confidence measure from 0 to 1, whether the track is acoustic, 1 representing high confidence that the track is acoustic. And so the value that you can expect is going to be a float, and it's going to be between 0 and 1. Another feature they give you is danceability, which describes how suitable a track is for dancing based on a combination of music elements like tempo, rhythm stability, beat strength, and overall regularity. Now this particular feature is the one for which we're going to be retrieving the value for in this project. They also give you other features like energy, instrumentalness, liveness, loudness. Now, of course, each one of these might differ in the range. For example, as you can see, the time signature, the value that you can expect is going to sit between 3 and 7. In other words, it's not always going to be 0 to 1, so just keep that in mind. What you want to do is have a look at these features, understand what the feature is, understand what the range is, and understand an example value that you're expected to get back when you actually call this method. Now on the right hand side, what's really cool is that if you're already logged in with your Spotify, which you can do by clicking on the top right, you can provide an ID for a song or a track, that's what Spotify call it, and they'll give you a sample or a response that you can expect to get back if you were to call this method. So as you can see, you have a JSON object that gives you all of the features that we described on the left hand side and some sample values that you can expect to retrieve. And of course, you can probably plug this in a test if you want to build out an application. You know, this is an example of a expected JSON response, and you can assert that your application code can handle a response like this. Now, for the purposes of this video, we're just going to be taking a few of these. Again, I just want to give you an overview or a basis for which you can kind of build on top of. And so we're going to pick a few and we're going to build a chart that depicts this for my own Spotify songs. Okay, this is the last library that we're going to be using. It's called Streamlit. I want to give you a quick overview before we start writing some code. Streamlit is a very simple Python library that allows you to build powerful UI. Building UI in Python isn't easy, and often Python developers resort to HTML and CSS and JavaScript, but one of the really cool things about the Streamlit library is you can build UI completely in Python. If I click on the docs here, as you can see, it opens up the page, and there are different sections for which they categorize the features available to you from the Streamlit library. Now I'm going to jump straight to the API reference, and as you can see, they break it down by different page elements, application logic, as well as tools. So if I go into the page elements, let's say chart elements, here are some examples of how you can build some charts, again completely in Python using the Streamlit library. They have area charts, bar charts. Bar chart is what we're going to be using for this video, but they also have some more advanced charts like matplotlib. So these kind of refer to other Python libraries, and these are especially useful and typically are mostly used anyway by those who work in kind of data science and data engineering. So you can integrate, or they have integrations with other third-party libraries. Of course, Plotly is one of the most popular ones. Now, of course, those were chart elements, but there's also data elements. So you can see tables, metrics, you can even draw out a map. And if I click on text elements, as you can see, they have capability for headings, titles, formatted text. You know, it really is extensive and quite powerful. And right now is actually one of my favorite libraries in Python. Now for our project, what we're going to be building is a Streamlit application where we're going to get the user to log in with their Spotify. Once they log in with their Spotify, we're going to retrieve their top tracks that they listen to, and then we're going to retrieve the features for those top tracks. And then what we'll do is plot all of that on a bar chart using Streamlit so that they can get a visual idea of the profile of songs that they listen to. Now you can then take this application and build on top of it. Maybe you might even want to build a song recommendations app. This kind of gives you that base that will allow you to do that. Okay, so it's time to start writing some code. So I'm in my editor VS Code today. I usually use NeoVim, but today we're using VS Code. The first thing that I want to do is create some files. So the first file that I'm going to create is a requirements.txt file. That's going to store the requirements for the project. The next file that I'm going to create is the main.py file. That's where we're going to put all of our application code. And then the last file that I'm going to create is a .m file, and that's going to store our secrets, namely the Spotify client ID and the Spotify client secret that we're going to be using for this application. Okay, so the first library that we're going to be using is the Spotify library. I've set this to install the version 2.23.0, but you might want to check on PyPy if there is a more recent version. The next library that we're going to be using is the Streamlit library. That's going to allow us to build the UI in Python. And then the last library that we're going to be using is the Pandas library. That's going to allow us to build what's known as a data frame that's going to have the features for each song that we retrieve from the Spotify API. Okay, so now I'm in my main.py file and it's time to write the core application code. The first thing I'm going to do is import the Spotify library. Then I'm going to import from the Spotify library OAuth2. In this case, we're going to be using OAuth. I mentioned that it's one of the authorization code flows that you would need if you want a user to log in with their Spotify account on your application. Now the Spotify library provides you with a module, and from that you can import the Spotify OAuth class, and that's going to allow us to pass in the OAuth credentials. Now the next library that we're going to import is the Streamlit library, and here we're importing it as ST. This is quite a common convention if you find many Python applications online that use the Streamlit library. Even in the documentation, this is typically how they install it and how they use it, and so we're going to follow that example. And then the last library that we're going to import is the Pandas library, which is a library used a lot in data science and data analytics. And PD is the module. In this case I've imported it as PD, but what we're going to use here is a data frame that's going to build up our audio feature set. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry. If you've never worked with the Pandas library, don't worry, I will go through that in a bit more detail as we write that code. And then the last library that we're going to import is the OS library, and this is going to allow us to get values for environment variables. More specifically, we're going to have the client ID and the client secret from the Spotify API stored in our environment variables. And then the OS module is going to allow us to retrieve the values for those variables. Now when you set up a application on the Spotify API dashboard, I'll show you how to do that later on when we go about running the project, but you're going to need to get the client ID and the client secret. What we'll then do is put those in the .m file, and then we'll retrieve them using the OS library. So to do that, we'll have a client ID variable, and in this case is going to retrieve again the client ID that's currently set in the environment. And then we're going to do the same for the client secret, and of course this will be set in the environment when we source the .m file. So I'll show you how we do all of that later on. Don't worry about it for now, just put this code here and know that we're going to be setting the value for these later on. And then the last variable that we're going to have is the redirect URI, and in this case we're setting it to http://localhost:5000. Set that to the same here. And one thing to keep in mind is that the Spotify library, when you interact with it, what it does behind the scenes, and I don't think this is actually well documented, is that it spins up a web server to run on this port. Now the reason why this is important is because if you're using a Mac, and quite a few of you have told me in the comments you're having issues with the Spotify library, I've kind of dug down to what I think the issue is, or at least what the issue was for me, and it's related to what Spotify does behind the scenes. It sets up a web server, or it tries to set up a web server, and the issue with this is that that conflicts with an AirPlay web server that if you're using the Mac will be set up in the background. And so I'll show you how to fix this later on, but for now just set the redirect URI to this string here. Right now that we've set up some of these variables, the next thing that we need to do is initialize our Spotify client that's going to allow us to interact with the Spotify API. To do that, what I'm going to do is declare a variable called sp, and I'm going to set that equal to spotify.spotify again, tongue twister, but what this is going to do is initialize a Spotify class. Now Spotify require for us to initialize its class what authorization method that we want to use, along with the values for that authorization method. Now in this case, and as I mentioned, we want to use the authorization code flow, and for that we need an OAuth manager. Now above, what we did is we imported Spotify OAuth, and we're going to use that down below by creating or setting auth manager equal to a new instance of Spotify OAuth. Now this class, again, as you can probably expect, requires a few things. The first thing that it needs is the client ID, which we declared above. The second thing is the client secret, again we declared that above, and as you can probably guess, the redirect URI that we declared above. But one thing we haven't declared above is the last thing that this requires, and that is the scope. And this is kind of the scope or the permissions that we want to request from the user. So when the user logs in with their Spotify, they're going to be told that, hey, this application wants access to your songs, it wants access to your playlist, you know, whatever it might be, right? If we want that data, we need to define or declare this scope equal to those permissions that we want access to. So in this case, what we're doing is we're requesting access to a user's top songs. We're not going to request playlists or anything like that because we don't need it for this application. But if you want your application to have access to users' playlists or other things like that, maybe the current playing song, you're going to need to declare those scopes here. And one thing to keep in mind is that if you change the scope, so for example, you know, you've deployed your application, a user logs in with their Spotify, and you've set it, in this case maybe to user top red, you'll get access to their top songs. But if you change this, the user is going to be asked to log in again to give you access to those new scopes. So just keep that in mind. They'll automatically be logged out. That's one thing you kind of just want to keep in mind if you're building out your application. Again, Spotify, in the name of security, are just making sure that you don't automatically get access to data that a user hasn't authorized. Okay, now it's time to set up Streamlit. And one of the really cool things about Streamlit is that it just makes it easy for you to be able to build UI elements. Now Now the first thing that we want to do is set what's known as a page config, and in this case what we're doing is passing a page title. We're going to call this Spotify dashboard. You know what, I might call this instead Spotify song analysis. Let's just make that more relevant. And what you can do is set a page icon. So in this case, I've set it to an emoji. It's going to be the musical note, but you can also pass in an image here. So it's quite extensive. I'd recommend that you explore the API. I can't go into it at the moment because I haven't set up my virtual environment, but you can definitely check out the documentation to see what's available to you. But in this case, what we're doing is setting the page title and we're setting an icon for the page. Then what I'm going to do is call the st.title method, and that's going to allow us to have a title on top of our page. So it's going to be a header, and in this case I've added text saying analysis for your top songs. And then the last thing that I'm going to do is just write out some kind of description text. In this case, it's discover insights about your Spotify listening habits. So this is just helper text. It's just nice to have. Of course, you can have your own titles and you can write out your own text. I'm doing this for our application here. Right, so the next thing that I'm going to do is create a variable called top tracks. And what that's going to be equal to is the method that we're going to call on the Spotify client that we declared earlier. And this is current user top tracks. As its name suggests, it's going to return the top songs a user listens to. And in this case, we've set the limit equal to 10. So it's going to return 10. I can set, or you can set that up to 50 if you like. If you want more than 50, you're going to need to set up pagination. But in this case, I just want 10. I don't want that bar chart to be too crowded. Now, the other thing that you can set is the time range. I've set it to short term, which is to say it's going to return the top 10 songs for a user in the short term of a short term time period. But you can also specify medium term or long term. So for example, if you were to set the limit to 50 and you were to set time range to long term, it would return the top 50 songs for a user over a longer time period. Now, I don't actually know what these translate to in terms of number of days or number of weeks or number of months, but you can kind of assume that Spotify have a better idea or will make a good judgment on what short term is, and they'll give you the top songs, the top 10 songs in this case, in the short term for that user. The next thing I'm going to do is then get the track IDs. So we're going to iterate through the results that have come back, and that's going to be in the items array. And then for each one of those, we'll iterate and we'll extract out the ID for that track. Now, the last thing that I want to do is declare a variable called audio features, and I'm going to set that equal to us calling the method audio features on the Spotify client. Audio features takes in a collection of track IDs, and for each one of those tracks, it will return the audio features for that track. And I showed you early on what that looked like. So it includes features like danceability, valence, acousticness, loudness, etc. And so what you want to do is just have a look at the documentation. You might not need all of these for this project. We're not going to be using all of them, but we're going to need to call this method to get back those audio features for the 10 songs that we're retrieving, or the top 10 songs that we're retrieving for the user. Right, so now that we've got back the audio features for each one of the songs, we kind of want to format it in a way that's going to allow us to represent it and build a bar chart using Streamlit. So the first thing that I want to do is make use of what's known as a data frame. A data frame, think of it as being a two-dimensional array. And if you've ever worked with spreadsheets before, you know you have columns and rows. And in this case, what we want to do is initialize a data frame with the audio features that we've retrieved back for all of the songs. So the first thing that I want is the name of the track, and we're going to extract that out. You know, earlier on where we called this method current user top tracks, we stored it in a variable called top tracks. What we're doing here is we're going to have a column called track name, and we're just going to extract out the name for that track for each one of those songs. The next thing I want to do is then build up this data frame. It's going to have 4 columns. We're going to have the track name, which we defined above. We're going to have danceability, energy, and valence. Now, the thing to keep in mind is audio features contains the danceability, energy, valence. In this case, it doesn't contain track name, and that's why we have like 2 lines here where you're going to have a column where it's going to have the track name. We kind of have to add that ourselves, and then the danceability, energy, and valence are going to come from the audio features that we initialized earlier in the data frame. Right, so the last thing that we're going to do is set the index for this data frame. Typically, when you create a data frame, it's going to be indexed by a indice, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, you know, and the list goes on. But I want to be able to access it by its track name. So to do that, what I need to do is call this method called setIndex. I specify which column that I want to be able to reference each row in that data frame with, and it's going to be the column name. And then in this case, I'm just setting in place equal to true, which basically will do all of that in place for this data frame, which means I don't need to create another data frame, update that, and I can just do it all in this one line. And then the last thing that I want to do is have a section right at the bottom, which is going to display this data as a bar chart. To do that, the first thing that I'm going to do is have a subheader. It's just nice, it has that separation for us, and the subheader is going to read audio features for top tracks. And then what I'll do is call a method on the Streamlit library, and it's called bar underscore chart. And it's quite easy. All you need to do is pass in the data frame, which I've done here. And you can also specify a height for that data frame, that bar chart. And in this case, I've set 500, which I think is a good size for what this is going to display. Right, and before we run the application, we need to head to the Spotify dashboard to create a new application that's going to give us our client ID and our client secret. And to do that, head to developer.spotify.com, click on login, and then just enter your Spotify details and then log in. Once you've logged in, you can then click on your name in the top right and then click on dashboard, and you can see a list of applications that you've created earlier. My channel is full of Spotify project videos, so definitely do check them out afterwards, and that's why I have these 2 applications already created here. But what you want to do is click on create app, fill in the app name, fill in the app description, the website, and for redirect URI, what you want to do is set it to the one that we wrote in the code, which is http://localhost:5000, and then select here web API and then click on save. Once you click on save, that will then create the application. You'll then be able to click on it here, so I'm just going to click on this one, and then if you click on settings, as you can see, you'll see the client ID, and click on view client secret, and that will reveal the client secret. What you then want to do is copy these 2, and we're going to paste it in our .m file, so have them in the clipboard, and I'll switch over to our .m file now and show you how you can populate them. Right, so I'm back in VS Code, and what you want to do is open up the .m file that we created earlier, and in here you want to have these 2 lines. The first line reads export space client underscore ID, followed by the equal sign, and then after this equal sign you want to paste in the client ID that you copied over from the Spotify web dashboard. Do the same thing for client secret, place that after the equal sign, and then what you want to do is open up the terminal and type in source.env, and then this will source the values for the client ID and the client secret in your environment. And then what that means is in our main.py file, these 2 lines here, which have the client ID and the client secret, here when we pull them, in this case actually I made a mistake, that should be client underscore secret. Good thing I did that. But as you can see, yeah, we'll have the client ID and the client secret, and that's going to pull it from the environment using the method os.environment.get. Right, so it's time to give our application a run. Let's create a virtual environment. I'm going to do that by typing Python 3.8, which is the version of Python I'm using for this, -m venv. So I'm going to create a virtual environment called venv, and then once that is created, I will then install the requirements into that. Well, I'll activate the virtual environment first by typing in source venv bin activate, and then I will install the requirements that we specified in the requirements.txt file in this virtual environment by typing this command, tap enter, and that will now install Spotify, Streamlit, and the other one that I can't remember now off the top of my head, Pandas, that's the one. We're going to install all of those dependencies, and once all of those dependencies are installed, it's time to now run the application. And you would think that you would run it with Python main.py. If it is a Streamlit application, you actually need to use Streamlit instead. So you can do that by typing in Streamlit space run space, I almost said space, well, I did say space, main.py. And then what I'm doing here is passing in a flag, which is --server.headless, setting it to true. This is just something I'm doing for this video. It prevents a browser window from automatically opening. I don't want to do that because I've got like 50 tabs open in all sorts of browsers. So in this case, I'm just setting that to true. You don't need to set that. You can, it's enough to do Streamlit run main.py. So I'm going to tap enter, and once I tap enter, it will eventually run our Streamlit application, assuming I made no errors, and it seems like I haven't, which is great. And as you can see, it says you can now view your Streamlit app in your browser, and here's the network URL. So what you want to do is you want to copy this URL and you want to open this up in your browser. Right, so I'm in my browser window, and what I'm going to do now that the application is running, I've added it or entered it into my address bar here. I'm going to tap enter, and as you can see, it's telling me that this application, the one that I created on the Spotify dashboard, you'll see the name of your own application that you created on the Spotify web dashboard here, but in this case mine is called Save Spotify Songs, and then it will tell the user that's logging in this application wants to access your top artists and content, right? So again, if you add more scopes for your own application, a user that's logging in with their Spotify on your application will be able to see exactly what permissions or scopes that they're giving this application access to. Once I click on agree, it will redirect me, and as you can see, it's built up this lovely chart of my top 10 songs, and on the bottom you can see each one of the songs. And if I hover over, as you can see, for each track I have this bar where the light blue color in this case represents Danceability, the darker blue color represents Energy, and the pink color represents Valence. But the really cool thing about Streamlit is you can customize this to have any colors that you like. You can customize each one of these bars, the y-axis in terms of like exactly what scale it shows. There's a lot of customization options available to you, and as you can tell, right, for each one of these songs, you know, Owundo Bami, great song, Goosebumps remix, fantastic song. This is quite insightful, right, because it's telling me, and I know this to be the case anyway, I prefer or I like songs that have a high score for danceability, higher score for energy. In this case, half of the songs are like have a decent score for valence, but yeah, high danceability and high energy. And yeah, it'll be interesting when you run this application, assuming that you have been coding along with me, for you to be able to identify exactly for your top 10 songs kind of what this looks like for you. You know, it's quite cool. And the really cool thing that I want to kind of end this video with is if you see here, you have the option to maximize, which is fantastic, but then I can come back out of that, and then you have these three dots, right? So if you hover over this Streamlit bar chart, I can save this as an SVG, a PNG, so I can send it to someone, and I can also open this graph or bar chart, sorry, in Vega editor. I'll leave you to do that. You know, it's not that exciting, but I think the cool thing is that you can save this as a PNG and send it to someone should you want to. Right, I'll link to a video that shows you how you can build an application that searches for songs using Spotify, and of course I show you how you can use Streamlit too. It's a really cool project. It really gives you a flavor of how you can build your own applications on top of the Spotify API and how you can add your own UI for it. If you enjoyed this video, at the least please do give it a like button. It definitely takes me a longer time to make these videos, but I really enjoy them, and hopefully you enjoy them too. Until next time, peace.